We are bringing in our hostess with the mostest, Carrie. Show some love, y'all.
Woo! Oh, am I on the show now? Can you all see me and hear me? Oh my gosh, Ome, I'm so sorry, everybody, to take you all. Hi, everyone. Ome, I was just grooving. How many of us are sitting here grooving in our kitchens, in our office? Wow, I wish I could wake up to you every day. That is so amazing. You are fire. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for being here on this Friday, this beautiful Friday. Thank you for coming to our 13th annual Thought Leadership Conference titled Unfinished, Actualizing an Intersectional Anti-Racist Future, hosted by the Center for Transformative Action at Mills College. Yesterday was powerful. We are so grateful to the 70 plus speakers who are gracing these sessions with their passion and their wisdom. We just surpassed our goal for 1,000 registrants and are thrilled that so many people want to participate in these discussions. My name is Carrie Maltzby-Lute. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Action at Mills College. The Center for Transformative Action at Mills College brings together people across sectors and industries to share ideas for building profitable, sustainable organizations and effective nonprofits that address social, racial, environmental, and policy problems. The CTA cultivates multi-sector collaborations and is an amplifier, convener, and partner for organizations and people that are actualizing social justice and equity. Here, we believe in radical inclusion for an equitable future. We believe that joy is a human right and not just for the most privileged. We believe that listening is one of the most important skills you can develop. We believe that systems have to be reimagined to eliminate structural racism. Yesterday, we were honored to have Canyon Coyote Woman welcome us in an important reminder that we are guests on native land that was taken. We honored our beautiful home in Oakland, California, or Ohlone Amamutsan. She encouraged us to look at the name of the indigenous land we are presently on and write our place in the chat. So here's a link. The team is going to pass out a link so you can research your land. And please feel free to chat what city you're at in town as well. Yesterday, we heard from so many people who are moving the needle every day. We heard from Heather McGee, the author of The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. She showed us how our current zero-sum narrative based on generations of racism has created the economic disparity harming so many people. In her podcast, she will tell the stories of the America that we are becoming, so please check that out. Michael C. Bush from Great Place to Work said that companies will thrive by embracing DEI and creating a true community of belonging. Kat Taylor, the co-founder of Beneficial State Bank, said, as white people, we have to awaken to our complicity in racist systems and how that informs our economic model. We reject the notion that value and purpose is to maximize profit. We need to rewrite the rules of capitalism. Ahia Robinson of VC Include said, to create equity, there has to be ownership all the way up to the supply chain. And finally, David Jackson from Evolve Oakland said, it's going to take collectivism to move the needle forward to actualize this intersectional anti-racist future. So this concept of collectivism will be highlighted today through a myriad of conversations and Make It Happen Now models that center community and seek to restore and create restitution. Today, we have 9 one-hour workshops, more than yesterday, you will have your choice between 3 sessions. We have sessions starting at 12:30, 1:30, and 2:30. So we have 3 tracks with 3 sessions on each track. So there's plenty for everyone. Some of our panels today include restorative economics, keeping Oakland BIPOC, inclusive, LGBTQIA+, centering businesses, reducing homelessness, housing as a right, Black socialization in urban spaces, empowering health, power of culture and joy, climate equity solutions. There's something for everyone. We'll close out the day by hearing remarks from Bambi Salcedo, the director of Trans Latina. And our closing keynote fireside talk will feature Karina Gold of the Segurite Land Trust and Noni Session of East Bay PRIC, which stands for the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. And I will be moderating that panel discussion. So finally, I want to introduce you to the CTA team. The CTA team consists of Patty Martinez, Alana Guth, Ali Chuggy Star, and Carter Brooks. And I welcome them to come forward and say a few words, and I'll read their bio. I could not have done any of this had it not been for our lean team, really a lean dream team. Hi there. Hi, everyone. So I'll start off with Patty while everyone else makes their way in. So Patricia Martinez, also known as Pato, is a senior coordinator with the Make It Right program in San Francisco. She's a restorative justice diversion program, which is a restorative justice diversion program. She is currently a candidate for an MBA MPP here at Mills College, and she is one of the organizers who is responsible for marketing and promotion and technical support. So would love to hear a few words and have you say hello, Patty.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and thank you for making it. I just want to shout out all the community organizations that I've been a part of, starting with Girls Inc., Camp Avery, aka Project Avery, Community Works West, Students Rising Above. Thanks to all my networks who showed up today. And also, I just want to do a quick plug. There is a book giveaway. Follow us on social media. I'm going to drop them in the chat now. Please like us, tag us, and stay connected with us. We appreciate everyone for coming today. Much gratitude, peace, and hope to see you in the networking feature later. Thank you, Carrie.
Excellent. All right, and next we'll go to Alana Guth, who is in her second year MBA. She's a second year MBA student at Mills College. Alana is passionate about liberal arts education and creating equitable and inclusive communities. Her background is in fundraising, event planning, and marketing.
Hi, everyone. Just so happy that people could attend today, and we passed the 1,000 registrants mark this morning. It was very exciting for us. It's been a wonderful conference, and I know one thing I'm trying to manifest is my dream of my partner and I opening our home to become a gender inclusive recovery space for people who come to the Bay Area for gender affirming surgery. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here doing this work and making sure we keep pushing ourselves to do better and be better for ourselves and our community. So thanks for putting this together, Carrie and team.
Thank you, Alana. It's beautiful work, and it'll be so wonderful to see that manifest. And the last, or actually not the last person, and Ali Shaggy Star. Ali is a longtime Bay Area activist. I'm sure probably 90% of you in the audience know her. She was instrumental in bringing this conference together to life and to helping get the word out and to also just finding all these amazing speakers that are here today. Her talk about connector, she really she is that. She is the ultimate connector. She's also the founder of Linked Fate Strategies. Check them out in the expo. You can learn more about the work she's doing there. Linked Fate Strategies works to amplify and deepen social impact results for organizations and thought leaders across the intersection of racial, economic, and environmental justice. She also offers DEI consulting for businesses, individuals, and organizations. And again, just connected to everyone. Ali, take it away. Say a few words.
Thank you, Carrie. I am so honored to work with this team. We have the dream team. This has been an incredible experience, and I am just so aware that our audience is filled with leaders. We have a leaderful movement, and this is a pivotal moment for us to make change. It's up to us. No one else has come in to save the day, so let's do this. And I'm really excited for the program today. And thank you, Carrie, for your leadership, for all that you've done to bring all of us together. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. And last but not least, Carter Brooks is an artist, philosopher of climate change, philosopher of climate art whose work explores how humanity and civilization will evolve in a rapidly changing world. Carter's installations of melting ice have been featured at numerous events and festivals, including Mountain Film and Telluride, the Art and Nature Festival, the Bioneers Conference, the San Francisco Green Festival, numerous other places. And Carter was selected as one of the first 50 presenters of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. And as an entrepreneur, he's the co-founder of Climate Earth. I had no idea about all these things. Carter would always just tell everyone he's just a tech guy. He came in to support us on Hop In. So yes, Carter, please say a few words.
Well, it's a super honor to be able to be part of this team and be part of this conference, which is just super, super rich. And, the pandemic has been a lot of people taking events to virtual. And so it's been fun to be able to support this sort of quick, we got to figure it all out, in a moment. So, and to be able to be an ally of this sort of work is humbling. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carter.
I appreciate being pulled in. Thank you so much.
I love that you like to fight fires. Just dive right in. So we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, team, for saying a few words. And with that, I will introduce our keynote. All right. So we're a few minutes past, but I'm excited to introduce today's opening keynote speaker, Saru Jayaraman, president of One Fair Wage. Saru Jayaraman is an academic at UC Berkeley and the president of One Fair Wage, which is a national organization working to raise wages for service workers nationwide. She was named one of CNN's top visionary women, a White House champion of change, a James Beard Foundation Leadership Award winner, and the San Francisco Chronicle Visionary of the Year. Saru authored Behind the Kitchen Door and Forked, a new standard for American dining. She's appeared on MSNBC, HBO, PBS, CBS, and CNN, and she lives in our backyard right here in Oakland. I'm so excited to introduce Saru Jayaraman to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Great. Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for your leadership, and to the Center for Transformative Action, and to Allie for inviting me to be part of this amazing conference. I am talking to you from Southern Oregon. My family's on vacation for spring break, and my 8-year-old is sitting right here next to me. But I'm really happy to be with all of you, because even while on vacation, we've been just a few minutes ago, in fact, working with Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Schumer and the White House on a huge historic federal minimum wage change that would not only raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but end the subminimum wage for tipped workers, which is still $2.13 an hour in the United States of America. And I wanted to share with you all why this is important to people in Oakland, to people in California, what this has to do with race, and the very important topics of this conference. And so to do that, I want to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of history. So the restaurant industry, actually prior to the pandemic, was the nation's second largest and absolute fastest growing private sector employer. Prior to the pandemic, there were 14 million restaurant workers in the United States, and almost 2 million of that 14 million were right here in the state of California. So California has had the largest and fastest growing restaurant industry of any state in the US, and the restaurant industry has been the largest and fastest growing private sector employer in the United States. We've way surpassed all other countries in terms of the amount that we eat out, the amount that our restaurant industry is growing. In fact, a few years ago, we became the first nation on earth that now spends more money on food eaten outside of the home than on food eaten inside of the home. And so we have just continued, the industry has continued to explode. If you just saw the job numbers that just came out this week, in fact, you'll see that the restaurant industry is rebounding already in terms of jobs. In every economic recession and depression, this industry has continued to grow. Even with the pandemic, we saw huge devastation of the industry, but it is coming right back. What hasn't continued to grow during this period, and what has stayed stagnated because of a direct legacy of slavery in the United States, is wages in this industry. So despite the fact that it's the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States. That's bad, not just for those workers. It's not just bad for those 14 million workers who are the lowest paid workers in America. It's bad for all of us. It's bad for the state of California. It's bad for Oakland. It's bad for every state when the largest and fastest growing industry is also the lowest paying. It means when a disaster like the pandemic strikes and people are out of work, they are so unable then to consume, so unable to not just survive, but to consume. It impacts all of the other businesses, Black-owned businesses, small businesses that you are talking about in this conference. It impacts our entire economy when the largest and fastest growing sector of workers cannot afford to put food on their own families' tables, thus cannot afford to consume, cannot afford to support small business or any business because they can't afford to support themselves. Now, how is it that you've got the largest and fastest growing industry in America, in California, with the absolute lowest paying wages? That, our research shows, can be attributed entirely to the money, power, and influence of a trade lobby called the National Restaurant Association. We call it the other NRA. It's been around in various forms since emancipation of slavery. Now, here's the thing. Emancipation happened in 1865. Just prior to that, in 1850, something big happened in the US. Prior to 1850, waiters in restaurants in the US were largely men, largely white men in many cities, and they were paid a full wage with tips on top. If there were tips, look, tipping originated in feudal Europe. It was an extra or bonus that aristocrats and nobles gave to serfs and vassals on top of a wage. The idea came to the States right around the 1850s. Prior to the 1850s, tips weren't even existent in the US. When it came, America resoundingly rejected the notion of tipping as a vestige of feudalism. America said, we're a democracy. Employers should pay their workers, not customers. And by the way, you should get good service regardless of how much you can afford to tip. And actually, there was a huge anti-tipping movement in the States. And at the time, waiters were mostly men, and they were in large part white men. Well, in 1853, these white men, waiters who got wages, full wages, went on strike. And in retaliation, they went on strike for higher wages, in fact. And in retaliation, the restaurant industry replaced them all with women. And so women entered the industry in very large numbers after 1850. And then at emancipation, the industry wanted the right to hire newly freed Black people and not pay them anything at all and have them live entirely on this new idea that had just come from Europe at the time called tips. And so they mutated the notion of tipping at that time from being an extra or bonus on top of the wage to becoming the wage itself, to replacing wages. And so it's so important to understand in the restaurant industry, just as women entered the industry, just as Black people were hired, that's when the wage went from a full wage down literally to zero. There was a zeroing out of the wage as women and Black people entered the industry. And so this idea of tips being a part of a wage or tips replacing wage cannot be understood as anything in the United States except for a devaluation of Black life and a devaluation of women's work in the United States. That is what it is. And that became law in 1938 as part of the New Deal, when everybody got the right to the minimum wage for the first time as part of the New Deal, except for millions of Black workers. Farm workers were left out. They were mostly Black. Domestic workers were left out. They were mostly Black. And tipped workers, who were mostly Black, mostly women, were entirely left out. They were told you can get a $0 wage from your employer as long as tips bring you to the full minimum wage. And we went from zero in 1938 as part of the New Deal all the way up to $2.13 an hour in the United States of America in 2021. And I started this talk telling you this is not a tiny sliver of the economy earning $2. No, this is the nation's largest and fastest growing industry. It's the largest employer of women. It's the largest employer of immigrants. It's the largest employer of people of color. It's the largest employer of formerly incarcerated individuals. It is the largest employer, period. And it is still allowed to pay a federal minimum wage of $2.13 an hour. Because of a legacy of slavery, because of the devaluation of Black life and women's work. And today, 70% of tipped workers are still women. They are women who work mostly in very casual restaurants, IHOPs, Denny's, mom and pop diners across California, across the United States. California is one of 7 states that got rid of this system many decades ago, but 43 states persist with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers that is a direct legacy of slavery. And when you put that ridiculously, absurdly low wage that is a direct legacy of slavery on top of the very pervasive and intensive racial segregation in our industry, it means that people of color and women of color in particular are the most screwed by this absurd and ridiculous devaluation of Black life and women's work, even today. Because people of color and women of color in particular are segregated in our industry into lower paying positions. They are bussers and runners rather than servers and bartenders. And they're segregated into lower paying segments of our industry, casual restaurants, fast food, as opposed to fine dining. But even when they make it into fine dining, even when they're standing side by side as a waiter with a white male waiter, they earn less. There is now mountains of irrefutable evidence that unfortunately tipping is not correlated with service in the United States. As much as you might think I tip for good service, the truth is that we all have unconscious implicit bias. And in the end, white men get tipped so much more than people of color and women of color in particular. There's such irrefutable evidence now that racial segregation leads to this absurd wage and reliance on tips actually becoming a disaster for people of color and women of color in particular, who earn so much less, both because of the kinds of restaurants they work in, the kinds of positions they work in, and the fact that they get tipped so much less, regardless of the quality of service that they provide. All of that means that you've got an industry of millions of women, and mostly women of color, working in very casual restaurants, struggling with 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the US workforce, using food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the US workforce, meaning the women who put food on our tables in America can't actually afford to feed themselves, can't afford to put food on their own families' tables. And worst of all, they suffer from the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry in the United States because they have to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior to feed their families and tips. Our research shows that show more cleavage, wear tighter clothing in order to make more money in tips, which means women in our industry are not told to tolerate harassment. They are told to go out and encourage it as a way to get tips. Now, we in California and the 7 states that have a full minimum wage with tips on top, what I call one fair wage, we have 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment as the rest of the country, demonstrating irrefutably that paying women a full minimum wage gives them the power, the agency to be able to reject harassment and know that they can count on a wage from their boss, whether or not they put up with the guy who's asking them for their number or trying to grab their butt. But half the rate of sexual harassment in our industry is still the highest rate of any industry in the US. I mean, it is now just so irrefutable that our industry has the highest rates of sexual harassment, and that can be directly traced back to the fact that people are earning their living off tips. So all of this, the incredible, poverty, inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, and sexual harassment became so much worse during the pandemic. During the pandemic, so much was revealed that to be wrong, so much that we knew to be wrong, many of us knew to be wrong before. I like to call what was discovered in our industry to be the pre-existing condition of our industry, the race and gender, the history, the ongoing segregation and discrimination and harassment became so much worse. Because what happened? During the pandemic, about 6 million restaurant workers lost their jobs. 1 in 4 people who lost their jobs in the United States was a restaurant worker during the pandemic. The industry was devastated, as all of you saw. But even worse, the part that people didn't know is that 60% of tipped workers in the United States, 60% of service workers could not get unemployment insurance because in most states they were told that their subminimum wage plus tips was too low to meet the minimum threshold to qualify for benefits. I will never forget a woman in Michigan called me from a small town in Michigan named Sarah May. She said, the wage in Michigan is, by the way, $3.52 an hour. That is the subminimum wage for tipped workers in the state of Michigan. She told me, I've been reporting my tips religiously to the IRS. But when I went to apply for unemployment insurance, they said that my boss had never reported my tips. It looked like that I had only earned the $3, and they said I didn't qualify for state unemployment insurance. Then came through, that was federal money. Although she qualified for it, she was told that she couldn't access it because it came through the state system, and the state had marked her as a denial because her wages were too low. She is one of literally millions of workers we've heard from during the pandemic who were told that their wages were too low to qualify for benefits. Mostly women, mostly single mothers trying to feed their kids. We started a relief fund during the pandemic. We raised about $23 million. 240,000 workers applied to us for relief. I cannot tell you without crying the stories that we heard from women, mothers during the last year, women working in the service sector. These are both documented and undocumented, unable to access any kind of benefits, including, by the way, the stimulus checks. Women who wrote to us and said, I don't have any food left. I don't have gas to get to the food bank. I don't even have a way to get to the food bank. At this point, I have to steal food from my children. Another woman wrote, I can't pay the electricity bills. I don't know how much longer I can be in touch with you online. We won't have internet. I mean, just stories and stories and stories and stories. Over the last year, it has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And last summer, late summer, fall is when many of these workers, although they really didn't want to, felt that they had no choice but to return to work, even though they didn't feel safe in most cases, because the CDC named exactly what they said, which is that the restaurant industry is the most dangerous place for adults to be, believe it or not. The CDC looked at a number of different environments and found that restaurants were the most dangerous, that in fact, for customers to go to. In fact, adults, they said, are twice as likely to get the virus eating in a restaurant. UCSF named the restaurant industry the most dangerous place to work, but the workers knew this. The workers were not being told by CDC or UCSF. You're in an enclosed environment where people take off their masks to eat. Even if you're outside, you're interacting with these maskless individuals all day, every day. And now you're being asked to do so much more for so much less. Workers reported, the vast majority of workers reported that tips are down 50 to 75%. And now they're being asked to serve as public health marshals, enforcing social distancing and mask rules on the very same customers from whom they have to get tips to survive. Workers told us that when they tried to enforce these rules, customers would retaliate by not paying them. And we actually did a special report on Black workers and found that Black workers were 10 percentage points more likely to be retaliated against by customers for trying to enforce these rules. So 70% of workers, all workers, said their tips were down 50 to 75%. 83% of Black workers said their tips were down 50 to 75%. 60% of workers said they get tipped less if they ask customers to wear a mask. 73% of Black workers said they get tipped less if they ask customers to wear a mask or sit 6 feet apart. So you are asking these workers to both rely on tips from customers and at the same time enforce these rules on these customers. And worst of all, I already told you this was, even before the pandemic, the industry with the highest rates of sexual harassment. Over 40% of all workers and 50% of women reported that sexual harassment went way up during the pandemic. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women wrote in comments to us from across the country saying that male customers have repeatedly during every shift asked them to take off their masks so they can judge their looks and determine how cute they are before they decide how much to tip them. I could read you some of these grotesque comments, or we could send you the report and you could read. We actually just printed them exactly as they were sent to us, 6 pages of literally 300 or 400 comments from women. Take your mask off so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much to tip you. Take your mask off so I know how pretty your face is before I decide how much to tip. Take your mask off so I can stick my tongue down your throat. We had a young woman in Arizona, which has a subminimum wage, by the way, for tipped workers. She describes herself as a young Latinx, voluptuous woman, on the shorter side. She said she was serving a couple in Phoenix, Arizona, a husband and a wife. And throughout the meal, the husband repeatedly said to her, take off your mask so I can look at your face rather than your breasts. Take off your mask, otherwise I'm just going to be staring at your boobs all night. Take off your mask so I know how pretty you are and whether it goes with the body that I've been looking at. I'm so glad, he said, I'm sitting at this level so I can look at your boobs all night. She was humiliated, of course. She was flabbergasted, but there's very little that she could do given that this is one of the few customers coming in that evening. Sales are down, tips are down. Every customer represents a very precious and unique set of tips that aren't coming in as often as they used to come in. And because there's a subminimum wage in Arizona, unless she gets those tips, there's no way to actually pay her bills. There's no way to get a minimum wage. And so what was a pretty horrific situation before the pandemic, what was a racial, economic, and gender injustice, a legacy of slavery and a devaluation of Black people and women's worth, has become now a matter of life and death, a life-threatening situation for millions and millions of women, single mothers, people working in the restaurant industry. And fortunately, that life-threatening situation, which, by the way, made these the only essential workers now in the US, and they are essential. relying on them to enforce these public health rules, but they can't do it. If they have to live on tips from those same customers, they can't do it. They're become the only essential workers now to be asked to remove their protective gear for the chance to earn their income. It is a pretty horrific and life-threatening situation. Thankfully, during the pandemic, two groups of people heard our cries for help. So all of this data I've been sharing, we put out in reports, we organize workers to go on strike to say we're not going to go back to work without a full minimum wage, without a livable wage. And thankfully, two sets of people heard our cries for help. One was actually employers, believe it or not. Prior to the pandemic, we had an association of small business restaurants, independent restaurants that actually agreed with us. There should be a full livable minimum wage of $15 with tips on top rather than instead of the wage. Hundreds of small businesses around the country had agreed with us prior to the pandemic. And those numbers grew to nearly 900 restaurants during the pandemic, including many in California, were moved either by the murder of George Floyd, wanting to not anymore follow a legacy of slavery in this industry, or they were moved by watching their workers not get unemployment insurance or being told by their customers to take off their masks, or frankly, in many cases, independent restaurants couldn't get their workers to come back to work unless they paid them a livable wage. There's actually a feature story in the New York Times a few days ago actually saying that employers during the pandemic have had a very hard time getting workers to come back to work. Well, if you have to choose between exposing yourself to the virus and your family to the virus because you're told repeatedly take off your mask and get very little tips for that, by the way, or get nothing, no unemployment insurance, no income, many workers are choosing to get nothing because it is not worth the risk, the increased hostility and the harassment that they're facing going back to work. So employers heard, and employers, many of these employers who changed their mind worked with us and with Governor Newsom to create a program. Julie Su, who's the Secretary of Labor of California and now is becoming Deputy Secretary of Labor in the US, worked with us to create a program called High Road Kitchens, providing cash grants to struggling restaurants in California, particularly those owned by people of color, that commit to livable wages, going through our intensive race and gender equity program to desegregate the industry and providing 500 free meals to the community. This program grew to 6 other states, New York, Massachusetts, Chicago picked it up with $1 million program, Michigan, the state of Michigan. We grew it to many other states, and now the Biden administration is working with us to make it a federal program. But it's an example of how we need to build back better and reimagine an industry that isn't just about saving restaurants. It isn't actually just even about saving people of color-owned restaurants. Unless we actually provide for the workers in these restaurants, the people of color, the women of color in these restaurants, and assure that they have livable wages and a chance to move up regardless of their race or gender, no amount of saving restaurants, even if they're people of color owned, even if they're women owned, is going to ultimately work. Because we cannot save this economy without ensuring that workers have the ability to survive and to consume. And thankfully, the second group of people who heard that and understood that was the Biden-Harris campaign, which named not only a $15 minimum wage, but full elimination of the subminimum wage for tipped workers to their campaign platform. And then, true to their word, did actually name that bill, 15 and full elimination of the subminimum wage for tipped workers, a complete elimination of this legacy of slavery, to the COVID relief package. Now that $15 bill is called the Raise the Wage Act, which would raise the wage to 15 and eliminate subminimum wages for tipped workers, workers with disabilities, and youth. It didn't make it into the COVID package, but unlike some of the reporting you've heard, it is still very much alive. It's a standalone bill that is likely to move this year. We've been working with the White House and Senator Schumer and Senator Sanders and many other senators. It is likely to move this year. And it is moving because of the efforts of people across the country, workers across the country, and people like you who are saying enough is enough. And we all know we're in this together, small business and the workers. We are in this together, and there's no way to come out of this without actually ensuring that people have a way to survive. So there are 3 things, I'm going to wrap up. There are 3 things that everybody here can do to support the federal minimum wage and to support programs like High Road Kitchens that encourage, incentivize, and support restaurants that are committed to race and gender equity. One, you can go to highroadrestaurants.org. There you can see the restaurants that are already doing the right thing, already part of High Road Kitchens, already committed to going through our race and gender equity program and desegregating the restaurants and desegregating the industry. Highroadrestaurants.org. Don't just support the restaurants that are there. Tell your favorite restaurant owner that you want to see them be part of this association of restaurants doing the right thing. Number two, we need your help to get this federal bill across the finish line. You might ask, why should people in California care about a federal minimum wage that would get the rest of the country to where we are? We have to care because as long as Arizona and our neighboring states and states around us have a wage as low as $2.13 an hour, the California Restaurant Association continues to fight in every legislative session for our state to also have a subminimum wage for tipped workers. So we have to get rid of it. We have to get rid of it everywhere because as long as it exists, it's a threat to California as well. So we need you to go to onefairwage, onefairwage.org/take-action and write a letter to your senator and to all senators telling them it's time to pass the Raise the Wage Act. And lastly, please let everyone you know that the industry is unfortunately not where it needs to be, that it is still toiling under a legacy of slavery, that there's severe racial segregation even in the state of California that prevents workers of color and women of color from getting to the best jobs. And help us inform others, restaurant owners and consumers alike, that there's no way to save the industry. There's no way to save the economy. There's no way to build back better without supporting restaurant workers and their ability to survive and live and thrive and their ability to move up, and all low-wage workers in America. Thank you.